1978. My cousin, he'd been trying to get me to go to this Bible study. He'd been trying to get me to go, and and it's on Friday nights, and Friday nights was cruising night. That was when we cruised the plaza, cruised the Main Street, and and just up and down, well, he showed up on my house. He lived outside of town, and his brother dropped him off, and he says, "Okay, you're my ride tonight. You got to take me to the Bible study, and so you're gonna go." So he tricked me to go. And so when I went, so here it is, almost a year I've been serving God, but I'm already starting to get cold because I'm not going to church. I'm not getting fed. And so I started to get a little bit cold, and not that I got into drinking or anything like that again. I just knew I was distant from God.
Yeah.
And then that was when the old girlfriend called me up, invited me to the Potter's house, and invited me for a New Year's fellowship. I found purpose, and I found a direction, because that's what I did not find in these other churches. Yeah, come to church but no purpose, no, it didn't give you something to do.
Correct. But let me ask you a question, Pastor. Prior to that purpose, right, understanding that purpose,
okay.
When you went into the first day, the preaching is happening, you were obviously impacted, like severely, like God did something powerful. You're crying, God's moving, you get filled with the Holy Ghost the night before, something's happening. You can pray for the Holy Ghost, you speak out in tongues. What was the difference in that moment of God touching you at the Potter's house that you can say, I was not part of this other stuff, this is different?
In Santa Fe, when I first went into the church, there was about 25 people. Church was open about 3 months.
Okay.
By the end of the year, the church was running 100 people.
Oh, wow.
By the end of the second year, it was running 200 people.
Wow, that's
By the end of the third year, it was running 300 people. So I was birthed in revival. I was birthed in people getting saved. And the thing is people were getting saved through the different ministries that we had, drama, music, different things, and just witnessing, talking to people. We saw so many people come in. And so when I went to Espanola, I had that similar expectation. This was my thinking back then. Well, we could have 75 at the end of a year.
Yeah.
And I remember we had 25 people. When we got about 25 people, I was really bummed out. And I remember I felt like a failure.
Your pioneering experience in San Antonio, did it differ from all your other experiences?
Well,
were you ever at a point in your ministry, through whatever capacity of issues, circumstances, problems, church issues, where you ever felt, I can't do this no more, I don't want to do this no more, or not? And if you did go through that, how did you get yourself through that? How did God help you through that?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I felt that, probably about every other month. No, I'm kidding. And
you're like, I'm feeling that right now.
The thing is, I had to learn not to carry the people's problems on my shoulders.
Okay.
Because what you have to do is you have to look at the problems you go through or the situations you face as an opportunity to learn. This is going to help me. And someday as I'm a pastor, I'm going to be in this situation. How I deal with it, will either say, okay, the way I dealt with it, it didn't turn out good, so I know not to do that. But what I say is just.
Welcome back to another episode of LifeSpeaksPodcast.com. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to give a shout out to the Choosing Hope Foundation. Go to the website, choosinghopefoundation.org. See what they're doing over there, man. Wrapped around prison ministries, just doing big things out there. Check it out if you want to donate, or if you just want to see, or if you just want to just check it out and see what can happen. Hey, just see it, see what can happen. Check out LifeSpeaksPodcast.com and be up on the info about our podcast. And thank you so much for watching. If you want to donate, you have an option on there. Next, the Potter's House, GRA.com with our church, Universal Church in Universal City, Greater Randolph area, 2025 Universal City Boulevard. Come and check us out, see how God's moving. Let's check out the website. Once again, it's thepottershousegra.com. And man, just see how God is just moving over there. And it is awesome. Like, subscribe to our podcast, ring the bell so you get all the notifications. And thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. My name is Luis Perez. I'm your host, a.k.a. Guicho Breach, and I'm here with
Nico Perez, a.k.a. Lil Big Red.
Lil Gecko. And so today we have a very special guest here on the podcast, and it is my pastor, Ben Rodriguez. And we're going to be, speaking with him in regards to different aspects of ministry and different things throughout his tenure as a pastor, and which you probably don't even know. It's not just here in San Antonio, but his ministry started way before San Antonio in New Mexico. And so we want to welcome Pastor Ben to the podcast. Thank you for being here, Pastor.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad I could be here.
Awesome. Okay. So what I want to get started with real quick is I know from hearing your testimony and the things that you preached that you got saved when you were 18 years old. And so the way I want to start the conversation is if you can go back before salvation, maybe when you were a child, your upbringing, how things were, and then leading into coming to the place where you were confronted with the gospel or someone witnessed to you. So how was your life growing up prior to salvation?
Well, pretty much growing up, my life was, I would say, normal as compared to a lot of growing up. I had both parents. Of course, they divorced later on when I was already an adult and out of the house. But, I had a mom and a dad. As we were growing up, I was the second oldest, but my oldest brother was deaf. And because he was deaf, since he started to go to the school for the deaf, and they had dormitories, so he would begin to live there, and so he would live there the whole school year, and we would see him off and on. So it was primarily, I was the second child, but also I was the oldest in the sense of how it went at home. And growing up, had a passion. My dad had some property up in the mountains of Pecos, New Mexico, and had some about 25, 30 acres, and we had some cows, and every once in a while I had a couple of horses, and that was my growing up. That was my passion. That's what I wanted. Mm-hmm. But I would say, typical kid, we lived in a neighborhood kind of separated from a lot of families. There was only a few families that lived where we lived up on a little mountain. Excuse me. And so I was real naive, I guess you could say. I wasn't street smart, wasn't just, I was just happy-go-lucky, wasn't really worried about anything. And in that sense, ranch was a big part of my life. Going to school, I liked school, mostly for playing basketball and eating lunch, mostly. But, I didn't mind school. I know I could have done better, but I wasn't motivated, and I had no one really to motivate. But, and so it wasn't until, I've always called me a good kid. I was a good kid. I didn't get into trouble. And trouble that I did get into, I give the credit to my next door neighbor, Piñon. His name was Anthony Gutierrez. And because he always had somehow to get me in trouble. One time we're walking home from school, they're going into a little store, their country store, and they said, "Come on in." And I said, No, I'll just be walking, you guys catch up. And so, I'm walking, all of a sudden they come running out, him and his two buddies come running out of the store, and he yells, "Run, they're after us." And here I am. I start running, And so, Joe, the grocer, never caught me or Anthony. The other two they caught, and they put our names up. Hey, if anybody knows who they are, they put me up for shoplifting and stuff like that. And so, which I never did.
Yeah.
So that's how, if you want to call my life a crime, that's pretty much it. I was a boring kid, really.
So what a lot of people probably don't know about Pastor Ben, so for those of you who are going to be watching, is he's from Santa Fe, New Mexico, born and raised, right? Santa Fe, New Mexico. And he's a real cowboy, right? You did a lot of cowboy stuff out there with the cows and the horses and knows everything about things of that sort. And so not only was it just being born and raised there, but he has a lot of background with dealing with a lot of these animals, horses, livestock. I guess I would call it livestock and stuff like that. And so that's pretty crazy. All the stuff that you were talking about being a little kid, being out there just, having a normal life, running around, getting in trouble. And then so this is as you're growing up, then you get into your teenage years, or this is your teenage years?
Yeah, and what it was, and then I started hanging out with an older cousin.
Okay.
I was probably about 13 years old, and this older cousin was a really bad influence.
Oh, okay.
He's the one that he introduced me to pornography. He introduced me to just shoplifting. This is when I started shoplifting, and it was mostly, and this is what's crazy. He had me shoplift for him because he had a real bad sinus problem. And so I would shoplift the Sinex, the stuff for nasal stuff. And other than that, then after that,
So shoplifting, pornography, what did it lead into alcohol, drugs, things of that sort, or no?
What happened, is my dad was an alcoholic. And I saw what it did to the family. I saw the relationship between my mom and my dad, how when my dad was drunk, how it changed the whole dynamic in the house.
Yeah.
And so, and I looked at that. And so when I would be with my cousins, we'd have beer. We were underage, of course.
Yep.
But the problem was, I didn't like the taste.
Yeah.
I'd rather be drinking a soda.
Yeah.
But I did just because I was with my cousins, the peer pressure.
What year is this?
This is probably 1973, 74.
Okay.
And so so I saw what that did. I remember the first time I got kind of drunk and I actually would get angry. I was one of those, I guess.
Yeah, you were an angry drunk.
I was an angry drunk.
Yeah.
And so I only had gotten drunk a couple of times, and you know what? I finally said, forget this. I don't want this. So I never did.
Oh, okay.
And then, of course, a little later on, when I was probably about 16, 17, I was hanging out with some guys that I worked with at a Spanish restaurant, and they were potheads, and I didn't know what the big deal was. So one time we're out, and I just said, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to see what this is all about. And so I remember taking some puffs, getting some things, started getting really dizzy. And I told my buddies, I said, is this what it's all about? Is it? Oh yeah. And I said, you can have it, man. And so, because I hated being dizzy, and stuff. So when it came to drinking and stuff like that, I just wasn't into it. I
mean, I think that's a pretty good precursor to your testimony and going into coming to know the gospel, because you're a good kid. You're not involved in all the craziness of the world. You didn't have this drawing to drugs and alcohol. You tried it, it's not for me. As you're making these decisions in your life as a young person, that's not for me. Drinking drugs, that's not for me. Is there anything that's transpiring that's making you feel there has to be more to life than this prior to salvation? Or is it just you just living your life, you're just not that kind of person?
Well, because I was a good kid, I never really thought I needed anything.
Okay.
I thought I was okay. But I remember a cousin of mine took me to there was called a charismatic weekend.
Okay.
And they were showing movies about Jesus, talking about Jesus. This was during the Jesus People movement. And I remember I was 14 years old when I went, and it didn't really make a big impact in me, but it did leave something inside of me, like something was missing, something was empty.
So as a young kid at that age, never knowing really about, I mean, you didn't have a religious background, right?
I was a Catholic.
Okay, so you had some sense of God or a bigger power, but when you're there as a 14-year-old and you hear the gospel preached, I mean, was it the gospel being preached?
It was the gospel that Jesus died on the cross.
So what was it that made that impact, even though it wasn't like a big deal, but what was the thing that kind of stayed with you?
I guess it was just seeing these movies about Christ and what he did and how he died on the cross, that kind of all of a sudden it triggered an interest.
Oh, okay.
And it even it triggered an interest to a point. I got my first car when I was 16.
Okay.
And I knew something was missing, and so I started going to the Catholic Church. I started going on Saturday. I started getting involved in some things. I was trying to seek something, but there was nothing there. All I found was religion. And I went to church every Sunday, but nothing happened. I didn't change. It didn't feel nothing.
So the evangelical aspect of what you experienced at that charismatic meeting made you feel like, well, I need to get closer to God, but all you knew was Catholicism.
Yeah.
So you're trying to get involved and receive some kind of some sustenance from it, spiritual, but it's not there.
Yeah.
So then what did you decide? You're like, I need to go.
Well, what turned me off really, because I was really searching, I was really looking, is the two priests from our church that we went to. They were both drunks. They would do mass while they were drunk.
Wow.
And I'm looking at that and I go, okay, well, what do they have that I don't have? Nothing. Matter of fact, they're in worse shape than I was. And so I shunned away from the Catholic Church, from Catholicism. And I went Sundays because my family, wanted me to go. And so I did, but I just went to just.
So that charismatic meeting that you went to planted some sort of seed that you couldn't really identify, because you said right now, you said I was searching, but there was nothing there in the Catholic religion. So that seed that was planted, even though it wasn't really much of a big impact, there was some sort of seed that made you say, there's more to this. I need more of this.
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. It had a pull on me, but then as time went on, it just went totally in the background.
So 14, 15, you're back in the normal stuff of life.
I'm just back, and then again, here I am hanging out with my friends. We got into rodeoing. We got into motocross racing. We got always looking for something, know, and we do it for a while and then you get tired of it, and it just, you're always moving from one thing to another. And I think that's probably where it began to hit me. Something was missing, and I was looking for something.
Because you had the friends, you had the nice car, right? I mean, you were into all these fast cars and fixing up your cars and torque and all that stuff. So you had friends, you had cars. I'm sure you had money, right? You were working.
I was working and treating all my friends because they weren't working.
Yeah.
And so, I was liberal. I was always helping people. I was always, like I said,
you were liberal with your money, not a liberal.
Yes, not a liberal. And but I was liberal in finance. I was liberal in someone needed help. I was always there.
And something is happening inside of you. You're like, there's got to be more to this. I have everything I could possibly want: money, cars, friends.
Well, that was the whole thing. Is a cousin of mine, when I was a senior in high school. It was I think around October, November. He actually it was January of 1978. My cousin, he'd been trying to get me to go to this Bible study. He'd been trying to get me to go, and it's on Friday nights, and Friday nights was cruising night. That's when we cruised the plaza, cruised the Main Street, and and just up and down, well, he showed up at my house. He lived outside of town, and his brother dropped him off, and he says, okay, you're my ride tonight. You got to take me to the Bible study, and so you're going to go. So he tricked me to go. And so when I went, originally when I first got there, I'm like, okay, well, let's just see what this is all about. And when I went in, walked in there, a bunch of young people were there, but there was this one person. It was a girl. She was a redhead, and that was one of the things that kept me going back to the Bible study. But that first night was the first time I heard the clear gospel.
Okay.
And spoken to me.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I heard it, but it didn't penetrate yet.
Okay.
It was in my mind, but it wasn't hitting my heart yet.
Did you make a connection between that meeting with the experience when you were 14 years old?
No.
So that experience was far gone. I mean, that thing, that seed died.
Yeah.
And then here it is. You're hearing it for the first time again, afresh, and you hear it clearly. Did that impact you, or is it just okay?
No, because my whole focus was on this girl.
Okay.
And so I would go and I'd go along with everything they were going.
Yeah.
I started to learn the lingo, Christian lingo and stuff. And but that fall, I ended up moving away from Santa Fe. Broke up with this girl. I still had my cars. Moved to Albuquerque, going to vocational school for auto mechanics and stuff. And it was while I was in Albuquerque, and that was when I knew something was missing. I knew something was going on, and so me and a couple of friends of mine were sharing an apartment, and they had left for the weekend to visit family. I stayed there because I was working a job, and I remember just sitting in the living room, and I'm just thinking, and that's when all that stuff started flooding back into my mind.
All from the
prayer meeting, from the Bible study, from the back from 14 when I was 14, and I'm just sitting there, and I realized something was missing. And then I remember hearing in the Bible study all the time, they're saying, he's the only one that can fill that emptiness, money can't, girls can't, cars can't, stuff, because they always related to our age.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, then that was the night I just said, and I cried out to God, and I told Jesus, if you're real, I need you to be real to me.
Oh, wow.
And that was the night when I invited him into my heart, and man, I had a born again experience that night, and that was in October of 1978.
And real quick, the Bible study that your cousin tricked you into going, that wasn't part of the fellowship. That was some other random.
No, it was just another independent. Some guy that had gotten saved, and all of a sudden he had a burden for the youth.
Okay,
and so he just opened his house and started having.
And Ms. Rodriguez was there.
And that's where,
but it wasn't fellowship.
That's where I met her.
That's where you met her. And so then here you are, you're moving out of town. God begins to really stir you, deal with you. You had a real born again experience. Is that where you got filled with the Holy Ghost or no?
No, no. What happened is I was living in Albuquerque, got saved. I knew I got saved. My two roommates, they knew something was different in me, and I started immediately. I go, well, I need to start reading my Bible. Okay, nobody told me. Never been to a Christian church, never been anywhere. But I knew, you know what? I need to start reading a Bible. And then I knew I had to pray, so I would start to pray. Then I realized I need to go to church. And so I started to visit a bunch of different churches. And so I had met some other Christians there in Albuquerque, and we started just going from one church, Christian church, to another. And there are some weird, crazy churches that we ran into, and finally found a nice church, that not a nice church, people where you could tell they were saved.
Yeah. So let me interject something real quick, Pastor. So as you've had this born again experience, obviously it was a conversion, right? And then you're trying to find a church, and you're visiting all these churches. As you're in your young conversion, as you're going through these churches, what are you looking for in those churches?
Well,
that you didn't find, then you found it in this other one.
Yeah, well, what happened is some of these churches that I went to, they were into the dancing. They were into the just emotion, and it was just very, very. And I was looking somewhere where, man, I guess I could hear about God. They would preach about Jesus.
So even in in the conversion, you were so young into your conversion, you could identify that.
Yeah, I mean, when a person really has a conversion experience, God begins to move in your heart and in your life.
Yes.
And so, and so this is what was happening. And so by the time I did find a church, I had already graduated from school, and I was offered a job back in Santa Fe at a dealership. And so I ended up moving back to Santa Fe, started going back to that Bible study, but it wasn't church. So I ended up finding a church, walked into the church, and I'm 19 years old by this time. Excuse me. And I had long hair down to my shoulders. I had, blue jeans, colored T-shirts. That was my whole wardrobe.
That's the hippie. That wasn't the hippie movement.
Almost afterwards.
Oh, okay.
Only reason I had long hair growing up, they never let me have long hair.
Oh, okay.
And so when my dad said, "Hey, you're your own," I let it grow.
Okay.
And so, but other than that,
Yeah.
But I ended up finding a church. Went there. It was a little bit of an uppity church, and I really didn't fit in. But I walked in, sat in there, and people really didn't talk to me. They didn't do anything. But while I was there, the pastor up on the platform, it was time to shake hands, and nobody really shaking my hand. And he gets off the platform and he walks over straight to me, ignores everybody that's trying to shake his hand, and he walks right up to me and he says, "Son, I am so glad you're here." Shook my hand, and the man went to that church till they fired him because he preached too much.
Oh man!
and
this was not a fellowship church.
This wasn't a fellowship church.
Okay.
So he left, and then after he left, I left soon after that.
Wow!
And so again, I visited some churches, and I wasn't getting anything. And I didn't know what I was looking for.
Yeah,
but I knew
it wasn't God.
It wasn't happening there.
Okay.
It would just, again, it almost seemed religious. It almost seemed boring, I'm 19 years old. And so finally, so here it is, almost a year I've been serving God, but I'm already starting to get cold because I'm not going to church. I'm not getting fed. And so I started to get a little bit cold, and not that I got into drinking or anything like that again. I just knew I was distant from God. Yeah. And then that was when the old girlfriend called me up, invited me to the Potter's house, and invited me for a New Year's fellowship. And so, and I thought about that and said, "Hey, let me see, maybe I'll get back with this girl." And then I said, "Nah, that's the wrong reason to go to church." Yeah. And so I asked my sister, says, "You know what? I'm going to go New Year's, but let's go for a service. Let's go see what this church is all about." And so we went on a Wednesday night. It was the day after Christmas, and heard the gospel preached. And I want to tell you something. I'm crying like a baby. And I went up. I answered the altar call, and the pastor prayed with me. After he prayed with me, he asked me, he said, "Do you want to get filled with the Holy Ghost?" And I said, "Hey, if it's God, I want it."
Absolutely.
And so even before he laid hands on me, I started speaking in tongues.
Wow, that's conversion.
But the funny thing about it was the night before, I knew I was going to church the next day. I was in my room, and I knew what it was to be saved. And I got my heart right with God the night before. And so when I prayed and I got my heart right, I started speaking in tongues. But I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
All I knew is, okay, this is, I hadn't visited a church of spoken tongues. I hadn't done any of that. And so when I went the next night to the Potter's house, of course, then it was called Victory Chapel. Okay. But it was, when I got there, then I heard the preaching. I heard people praising, and I thought they were speaking in tongues, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't pay much attention. And but then when I started speaking in tongues, then I realized, okay, that's what this is.
So real quick, Pastor. So while after you had received, you knew what's up about salvation and you had gotten your heart right. You were searching. Apparently, Ms. Rodriguez was also searching on her end, right? She was still, because she ended up at this church.
Well, my wife, she got saved when she was 15.
Oh, okay.
She served God in high school on her own, going to the Catholic Church because that's all there was. And then, she ended up at that prayer meeting, at that Bible study. And then from there, she ended up going to the Potter's House. Actually, the very first night they opened up with a film series. And so from that point on, my wife was, at that time, ex-girlfriend was going to the Potter's House for 3-4 months already.
Okay. And so, you said that when you heard the gospel preached, you were crying. God obviously impacted your heart. What was the difference from everything you had experienced, all in a lump sum, everything you've experienced prior to going to the Victory Chapel, Potter's House, and what you heard that impacted you to that degree? What was the difference in everything you've experienced in church, religion, to this?
Well, what it was is when I went into the Potter's House, I found purpose and I found a direction, because that's what I did not find in these other churches. Yeah, come to church but no purpose, no, it didn't give you something to do.
Correct. But let me ask you a question, Pastor. Prior to that purpose, right, understanding that purpose,
okay.
When you went into the first day, the preaching is happening, you were obviously impacted, like severely, like God did something powerful. You're crying, God's moving, you get filled with the Holy Ghost the night before, something's happening. You can pray for the Holy Ghost, you speak out in tongues. What was the difference in that moment of God touching you at the Potter's House that you can say, I was not part of this other stuff, this is different?
Well, the salvation was the same. It was the same feeling that when I got saved the first time, and then when I rededicated my life, it was like getting saved all over again. And so the impact was, it just, how would you say? There was just a heavy presence of God.
Okay.
It was just a heavy presence.
So the Holy Ghost was in there, just
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so then from there, then you keep going to church, and you through the preaching, you realize, oh, whoa, there's purpose for my life.
Oh, absolutely. Because during the announcements, they announced that there was going to be a conference. This was a fellowship conference, and I'm just in the church, and I think this was my second service there. And I asked the pastor, what is this about? And he said, oh, this is a pastor's conference, but it's for anyone that maybe someday wants to be a pastor or whatever. And he had asked me if I wanted to go. And he goes that they'll sponsor me to go. And I said, sure. So I took a week off of work. It was only a couple of weeks later. But prior to going to the conference, I'm sitting in this church service. And while I'm sitting in the church service, my pastor's preaching. And as he's preaching, I felt God speak to me, and he put a call of God on my heart to preach. I was really shy. I did not, it was a torment to be in front of people. I did not like it at all. And so when God called me to preach, and I told God, are you sure? I said, because God, if this is you and you're calling me to preach, then you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to work something through my life, because, I've always been very shy from things of that sort.
And so in God's, obviously you're seeing here, like, I can see very clearly you got from where we stand, right? Obviously God was trying this purpose. God's trying to move you forward. You're looking back, you're like, wow, like what God was going to do. How did this, so here you are, you're like, God, if this is you, then make it happen. How did that purpose manifest into discipleship, leadership? What were the ins and outs? Because here it is, I'm sure, and I don't know if you can talk about this or you want to, because at the same time, your relationship with your ex-girlfriend begins to blossom into something.
Well, what happened is once I went to the conference, which was just a couple of weeks later, I saw what the fellowship was all about. Planning churches, raising disciples. Got to see a really good picture of that.
So it clicked in your brain at that point, like, whoa.
And at that point, I'm like, okay, well, I am in a place where this can happen. And so when I came back from the conference, I just jumped in. I started going to church, started praying, going to prayer meeting in the morning. I started going, whatever I could do, I wanted to do.
And when you went to that conference, there was announcements made? Like people got launched out during the conference?
Yes. And it's funny because that first conference that I went to, they were all, they're cheering because we had 80 churches.
Oh, wow.
That we have now. We have over almost 3,500 churches
Yeah.
around the world. Back then, there was only 80 churches.
And so as you're seeing this transpire at conference, you're kind of new to this whole thing, but your perspective was, or your perspective was like, I can do that. I can be that.
Not so much I could do that, is that God can do that in me.
Okay.
That God can bring me to that place.
Okay.
Do the changes that need to be changed.
Go ahead.
Did that motivate you at all? Seeing all those people get sent out?
Oh, absolutely.
Or where you're like, oh,
Absolutely,
maybe not right
because
now.
a lot of these people were young.
Yeah.
They weren't, I'm like, because you think of a pastor, you always think of old man, you always think of these older people. And here were so many young people that were saved, serving God, married, pastoring churches. We were just starting to go into Australia and into the Philippines and into Mexico, and it was just starting, and man, it's just like, whoa, what God could do.
And so even in your in your shyness and your timidity, were you ever like, and I'm asking this from the perspective like me, like was your perspective was like, even though God can do this through me, what was your idea like, I want this too? Because I know like in my perspective, when I came in the fellowship and I got saved, my perspective was like, I want that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I want to do that. Like, how do I do that? You know what I mean? So was that your perspective? Like, yes, God can do this, but was it like, I want this, or was it something that God had to develop in you, even though you knew God could do it, God had to develop that in you beyond that place?
No, it was both.
Okay.
It was both. I wanted it, but I knew in myself I didn't have to do it, but I knew with God, like the scripture says, all things are possible.
Correct. So you were like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to become this. God's going to do this. God's going to help me, and I'm going to become this because I want this. And so you went back home to your church and just began to enter into just being a part of the church, laboring, or is it like, I want to be a disciple, or where does that revelation come in?
Yeah, I think that revelation came in as I was involved.
Okay.
Didn't even realize I was a disciple, but I was already a disciple. I wanted to do something. I got involved in drama ministry. I got involved in, and then as later on, as I began to grow in the Word of God, by this time I'm already 20 years old, and so they had me be able to be an assistant to a Bible study leader and different things of that sort, where it began to work in my life.
So, I mean, I think it's very important to note that, the whole dynamic of discipleship, and this is for people who are watching, Pastor Ben said it very, very well. Before he ever even understood discipleship, he was already a disciple, because the spiritual reality of discipleship comes from a conviction of the things of God. And so as you're being involved in being a part of stuff, doing things, you were a disciple. You probably didn't even know you were a disciple. And when you finally got the revelation of that you're a disciple, you've already been functioning like a disciple. And so I think that's very important to note, because I've heard it preached before where people say, if you want to be a disciple, go tell your pastor, which I mean, I agree. I think that's correct. I remember me doing that. I remember me hearing a sermon being preached saying, and if you want to be a disciple, you need to go tell your pastor you'll be a disciple. And I remember coming to you as a teenager who was like, I want to be a disciple. And you were like, cool. And I was like, because it's more to it than just, hey, I want to be a disciple. You know what I mean? And And I think that's good to note for people, men, young men, people out there, people watching. It's like the dynamic of discipleship is far more than just saying, hey, I'll go on record, I'll be a disciple. Before you can be a disciple, you have to function as one. That's a conviction that comes out of the reality of your spirituality, your walk with God. And so here you are now. You are a disciple. You're functioning. You're helping. You're involved in different things. Where, as you move forward in this, where does it take that next step now? Here you're fully involved in the church. You're doing all kinds of things. Where does it become more than just a disciple?
Well, I think what it was is when I realized what God was calling me to, and what I saw what the fellowship was about, and then of course at the same time you mentioned earlier about where does Peggy come in on this, and what actually we started talking, and we began the relationship in a correct manner. Not that it wasn't correct before; it's just that now it was more serious in the sense of, okay, we don't want to just date to date.
Correct.
But now we're looking at, hey, dating is for the purpose of finding someone that you're going to live your life with, someone that you're going to be involved in ministry with.
I think that's so. I think that's very powerful, because I think that, and I mean, this is just a small part, but I think that's lost. That perspective of I like someone, I'm going to date someone, but it's for the purposes of God, because I want to do something for God, or because we want to embark in something with God together. And I think in today's world, in today's generation, I think a lot of that is lost with people. But I think it's refreshing to hear that, and people to hear that, so that we can continue to function in that perspective. Like, dude, we're not out there just looking for a girl or a guy just because. Like there has to be, and you said it was more serious. I think the reason why it was more serious, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why it was more serious is because now Christ is the center focus of everything that happens in your life, including this relationship that could blossom and become something more. It is Christ that's in the center, and I think that's one of the premises for everything great that God's going to do. And so, so here you are developing yourself. God's helping you. Now you're in a relationship with Ms. Rodriguez, and it's you're focusing on doing something for God. What transpires in this moment then?
Well, in that sense, it was like almost 8 months later. We ended up getting married because I had known her 2 years prior to that. And so it wasn't just I met her and all.
That helps, right?
And so in that, and then I just began to pattern my life. Okay, if I'm going to be a pastor someday, well, I have to become people orientated. I was not people orientated.
Okay.
And and I remember praying, saying, God, you're going to have to do this. So I was working as a mechanic, and obviously you're not dealing with many people as a mechanic. Yeah. And so that job went sour. So I got another job working as a service advisor. And so I would write people's problems up and stuff. And it put me in a place where how would you say, it put me in a place that I had to deal with people, deal with their problems, with their issues about their cars. And then at the same time, I began to grow in the company, and they would begin to leave the shop in charge, left me in charge of the shop. Mm-hmm. And here I am. I'm 21 years old. Mm-hmm. And they're giving me this responsibility because I realized that being as a disciple, it began to make me understand how important it is to be responsible. And so in that sense, and so what it did is start making me the man that I needed to become.
Correct. And so here you're in the journey now towards wanting to get sent out one day. Is that place?
Absolutely.
Okay. So prior to that, if we just backtrack a little bit, you're already married, right? At this point. Okay. So is this like, did you discuss this with your wife and say, hey, we're disciples, or I'm a disciple, but I want to preach the gospel. I want to get sent out, and what was that conversation like?
Well, that was one of the, when we started talking again, and we started, And I one of the things that I brought up to her is I wanted her to know that I have a call of God on my life to preach the gospel. And I wanted her to know that because if that's the direction that I'm going, I needed her to be on track if we were going to get married.
You to follow in that direction.
And she told me, she says, you know what, I'm not interested in being a pastor's wife, but I'm willing to do and go wherever you go. And so we went on in the relationship, ended up getting married, and then almost at our 3-year anniversary in the church, we got sent out.
And at this point, is Naomi already born at this point?
When we went to pastor?
Well, no, at where you just said right now, where what did you just say right now?
The 3-year?
The 3-year anniversary. You got
at our almost being in the church 3 years is when we got sent out.
Okay.
And so by this time, Naomi was already, I think she was already about 12 months old.
Oh, okay.
And so, because we got married September of 1980, Naomi was born July of 1981.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we got sent out in September of 1982.
For those of you who don't know, Naomi is my awesome wife. I just want to put that out there in case y'all don't know him, man. But so you get sent out. Where did you get sent out to?
We got sent out to a little city just outside of Santa Fe, about 25 miles. The name of the city is called Espanola, New Mexico.
That's the one that is. Is it like in a it's kind of? Oh, which one was that?
It's in a valley.
Okay, I think
They're
that's the one.
going towards the mountains of the Sangre de Cristo mountains.
Okay.
And little city's probably about 7,000 people.
Is that the one that they say it's a lowrider city or something?
It's a lowrider capital of the world, man.
Okay.
Every Sunday afternoon, the lowriders, to go through that little 2-mile stretch of Riverside Road, it would take you a good hour and a half just to get across because of all the lowriders just going really slow.
Hey, Pastor, but before we talk about you pioneering there in Espanola, what was the conversation, or what was the situation to get sent out with you? Like, was it like, hey, do you want to get sent out? Was your pastor like, hey, or you like, hey, or how did that happen with you? And then eventually getting set up to get sent out.
The thing was, in my relationship with my pastor, obviously we had conversations about ministry, and I let him know my desire to want to pastor someday.
Okay.
And I said, and I'm open to whenever God opens the doors. And it wasn't that I'm going to be the first one. I'm going to be. All I knew is when God's ready, I'm ready.
But you were the first church launched out of that church.
I was the first church.
So you were the very first church launched out of your church there in Santa Fe.
Yes.
Oh, and so you're there in Espanola. Mm-hmm. What did you expect, and what actually happened in your pioneering?
Well, because of the church that I was raised in as a disciple. One of the things that was really built in my heart was faith, and knowing that if I go out there, I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to give it my best. But I knew that God was going to do his work. Mm-hmm. And God did a quick work in Espanola. God really blessed us with people.
Oh, wow.
We, in the almost 2 years that we were there, I mean, we're almost running 50 people.
Wow.
And in that time, I learned a lot as a new pastor.
So, and we hear this all the time. And in my situation with my pioneer churches, the expectation of a pioneer pastor to the reality of what pioneering is. What was your expectation? Was it just faith? I want to see what God does. Was it this perspective of this kind of like unbalanced perspective that a lot of men have, including myself, when we're pioneering, where it's like we imagine that we're going to get there and God's going to pour out his spirit, but we understand that that's not how pioneering works. Was that, even though you saw success and you saw God move powerfully in that city and in that church, was it, did you experience the same thing where it was a struggle building, or is it that you just had revival?
I want to say, because see, in Santa Fe, when I first went into the church, there was about 25 people. Church was open about 3 months.
Okay.
By the end of the year, the church was running 100 people.
Oh, wow.
By the end of the second year, it was running 200 people.
Wow, that's
By the end of the third year, it was running 300 people. So I was birthed in revival. I was birthed in people getting saved. And the thing is people were getting saved through the different ministries that we had, drama, music, different things, and just witnessing, talking to people. We saw so many people come in. And so when I went to Espanola, I had that similar expectation. You know, my pastor, very, very, had an excellent personality, got along with people, were very charismatic in the sense of he just drew people. And I knew I wasn't like that. So when I thought about Espanola, I said, you know what? There's no way I'm going to have 100 people in a year. He says, you know, because I don't have the personality of my pastor, but we could have 75. This was my thinking back then. Well, we could have 75 at the end of a year.
Yeah.
And I remember we had 25 people. When we got about 25 people, I was really bummed out. And I remember I felt like a failure. And I remember having a conversation with Pastor Wayman Mitchell, and I said, "Man, I'm running 25 people." And he goes, "How long you been open?" We've been open about 8 months. And he says, "Do you know how many people wish they had 25 people?" At 8 months, he says, "That's phenomenal." There it is.
Yeah.
And so so that gave me encouragement. So then, man, that just energized me. And so by the time we left, running almost 50 people.
So how many years did you pioneer pastor in there?
I was there almost 2 years, and then they asked me if I would take the church over in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
And so just so for those of you watching, that church to this day is active running, and it's sending out churches. The one you pioneered, right?
The one in Espanola is still going strong.
And Jack Miller is the one that pastors that church.
No, Tim Miller.
Tim Miller? Okay,
His son.
sorry about that. Okay.
That's his son.
Okay. Yeah, Jack Miller's the dad.
Yes.
Okay, so Tim Miller pastors that church that he pioneered, and they've launched churches out of that church.
I believe they got 3 churches out already.
Wow. And so that just speaks to the dynamic of ministry, and what God did in that city. And so that you can look back all these years and be like, what was established there through a man is still active and is still producing and doing even greater things beyond the place where it was pioneered and pastored at the beginning. So then you take over what church?
The church in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Las Cruces, okay.
And so we went there. This was an older church. Was taking it from a seasoned pastor, and it was very strange because I was 22 years old when I first went to pioneer in Espanola, and at that time I happened to be the youngest pastor that got sent out in our fellowship until Pastor Ruby went out at 21.
Oh wow!
And so, but people were looking at that and go, "Wow, hey, if they can do it, so can we." So I had a lot of people say that we inspired them when they saw our picture in the trumpet, and they're going, "Man," because I look like a little kid still.
Oh wow!
And so it did that. So we went to Las Cruces, and it was very strange because here I am. I'm at this time I'm almost 24 years old. And most of the people in the church, most of the men in the church were older than I was, except for one young man. He was a year younger than I was. And but you know what? God did a work there. God began to help us. And man, I grew in many areas there. And then just looking to see what God would do. We saw in the 4 years that we were there, the church, we were running about 110.
Wow. And so you went from Espanola, right? And then did you go back to your mother church and then Las Cruces, or did you just go straight over?
What happened is we were going to pioneer again.
Okay.
We were going to go to Lubbock, Texas.
Wow.
So we had actually left, and we were going to Lubbock. And when we got in Lubbock, there were some family situations that came up, and so we called my pastor, and my pastor said, "Well, go ahead and come on home." And so we went home, and this was a new pastor that was pastoring Santa Fe now. And so went home, was there for a couple of years until we got sent out again, and then we got sent to San Antonio, Texas.
Okay, so this is you are in Las Cruces, right? That's the one you took over.
Yes.
Okay, before we talk about San Antonio, you always hear people say transitions are difficult. Was that your experience?
Transitions are very difficult.
Okay.
And
Or takeovers, they say takeovers.
I look back and my preference, if I have a choice to pioneer or to take over a church, I would rather pioneer.
Okay.
But there are some men that, man, they have just an excellent calling that they're able to take over churches.
Okay.
So you have to see where you are in your ministry and in your relationship.
So
with God.
when you're there in that church, were you the church you took over? Is it? Was it like you got inspired to go somewhere else, or was it your pastor was like, hey, we need to send someone here? How did you leave from that church?
It transpired basically with me and my pastor talking about it, and so then.
So you felt like your work was done there?
So then, and looking back, I almost wish I would have stayed.
Oh wow!
And thinking that maybe I could have done more, and I could have, But again, I'm young. And I know a lot of my friends have already pioneered 2-3 churches, and so we're just
You wanted to go pioneer
took the
again.
step, yeah.
And so then you went back to your mother church, and then you discussed what I'm going to do.
And it was a blessing because during that time, one, I got to build my relationship with a new pastor that was there in the church. Mm-hmm. 2, I got all my certifications as a Ford technician. 3, learned how to play bass, and I was in a band. And so I learned a lot that I didn't learn in the first early years of my discipleship.
Is Danielle born at this time or no?
Danielle was born when we were in Santa Fe. Both girls were born in Santa Fe.
Oh, okay. So that's when you were back in redirection or whatever
Yes.
you were.
Yes.
Before you went. So you're back home. Danielle's born, and then from there you were going to go to Lubbock. You said?
No. We were already in Lubbock.
Oh.
And that's when the family situation came up.
And y'all came back.
And we went back to Santa Fe to take care of that. And then from there, it just all of a sudden God opened the doors.
So the discussion came up like, hey, would you want to go to San Antonio? And the reason why I'm asking, and the reason why I want to know all this stuff is because that's where I could be the picture. You know what I mean? So I'm like, how you ended up in San Antonio is a big part of my testimony.
Yeah. Well, my pastor came to me and my wife and asked us, we were asked first to go to a city up in Colorado and to take over a little church that was there in Colorado. And at the time, I had just bought a little pickup truck because I had gotten in an accident. And so I was in a little bit of debt. And so I told my pastor, I said, you know what, Pastor, I would, but I'm in a little bit of debt. Let me get clear the debt. And if the doors open again, I'll go out. But at this time, I don't think it's a good idea to go financially.
And so then you got cleared the debt?
So I cleared the debt. It was done within 3-4 months.
Oh, okay.
And then at the 6-month period, my pastor came to me and said, I want to plant 2 churches in Texas, one in San Antonio, one in Corpus Christi. And so he offered me, he says, so what city would you like to go? And
San Antonio.
and we're thinking, you know what, San Antonio. We just said, they said Corpus Christi was next to the ocean and stuff. Yeah. And I'm not a water person. So I said, well, we'll go to San Antonio.
So God was like, you need to go to San Antonio because Luis is there. No, just
but no. And so we did. Once we were announced, started getting everything in order, packing everything. Because I worked at a dealership, they gave me letters of recommendation. I already had a job waiting for me in San Antonio because I was a mechanic, and in that sense. And so first time we ever saw San Antonio was driving in with a U-Haul.
Wow.
And had my 2 daughters. You know, my oldest was 9 years old. My youngest was 3. And so we're coming in, and as we come into San Antonio, we're just driving through, and we're driving and we're driving. Never been in this large of a city.
Wow.
And first thing that came to my mind was, how in the world are we going to reach this city? It was massive. You know?
It was massive, but it wasn't as big as it is today, but it was still massive.
It was, yeah, in comparison to Espanola, 6,000 people.
Okay, yeah.
Santa Fe and Las Cruces were about 70,000 people. And I'm coming into a city that's over 1 million people. Wow. And so, but God, I felt God speak to me and just say, one person at a time.
Wow, and I think that's cool because, you know, how God works, because you could have landed anywhere. Like, you know, you could have been in Colorado, or you could have been in Corpus, and how God, in his providence, his orchestration, and here you are, you land in San Antonio. So you drive into San Antonio, it's overwhelming, it's a big city. You got to start somewhere. Where do you start? Where do you set your focus? And this is what I'm going to do.
Well, you know, I wish it was like God spoke to me and he said, right here. No, we took out a map, started to look at the south side, north side, west side, all the different areas where there were at that time. I believe there was 2, maybe 3 churches here in San Antonio.
Okay.
And so we looking at the areas, and
So San Antonio was like new territory, like
it was fairly new territory. Pastor Ruby was pastoring there on the south side, and he had just moved over to Ingram, not to Ingram, but to General McMullen area.
the Imperial Church, the church,
Imperial Church.
Okay.
And so the south side was open again, north side, the northeast side, the east side, the northwest side, all this area. So we went all these places, but it wasn't until we were on Walsham Road, we decided to go eat at a Luby's restaurant.
Oh man, I remember that.
And so when we walked into and we're in line, and I'm looking at the people, and I see black people, white people, Mexicans, Asians. I see, and my heart leapt inside of me.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I really felt this is where God wants us to be, on the northeast side of San Antonio.
Wow. And so you got your whole family there. You're trying to figure things out.
Well, it just so happened the house we found to rent happened to be on the northeast side of San Antonio.
And everything was pretty much wooded. It was a lot of wooded area back then, right?
Where we lived, H-E-B, Walgreens, and a gas station.
But even the Walsham area, I'm assuming it wasn't very well developed yet, right?
Walsham area was, because it's an older area because
Okay.
of Windcrest and and of course you have the
The mall?
the Windsor Park Mall, where later on they called it the Killer Mall.
Yeah.
Because of some gang shootings and people dying. And
But so I would assume then the Walsham area was a very kind of newer area, wasn't it?
no, because again, what do you call that area where Joseph is at? What's the name of that?
Oh, Camelot.
But then there's the real rowdy place.
The Glen.
The Glen. There was the Glen.
Okay.
And so a lot of that had already been there quite a long time.
Oh, wow.
It'd been there quite a while.
So this is what, 1990?
We moved here in October of 1990. And then once we decided we were going to be on the northeast side, then we found a building off of Walsham Road on Cross Creek Road.
Yeah, and so so how did you? I mean, what was that whole scenario like? You got your house that you're gonna rent, and then you just start going through the city trying to find buildings, trying to.
Well, once we knew we were gonna be on the northeast side, we started looking at buildings, started looking at different things. There was a elementary school on Walsham Road, and we decided, well, let's do an outreach. So we did a weekend outreach with the Rapture movies, the end time movies, and man, we had over 100 people get saved during those 3 nights.
Really?
And because we saw all those people that got saved, we're like, you know what? We're going to look for a building in this area.
Okay.
And it just so happened that in that area there was a little shopping center, Cross Creek Shopping Center, and they had a building, and they rented it to us, and we were there about 12 years.
And that elementary school, you're talking about the one literally across the street from the Cross Creek, right?
Yes.
From on Walsham.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And there was right across the street from the little shopping center, Builder Square was there.
Which, you know what's so crazy about that? And I was telling Naomi this the other day. I was like, me and my dad would go to that Builder Square all the time when I was younger, and y'all were already there.
Yeah.
And I had no clue. Like, all the time, we were always at Builder Square, always doing stuff there, and y'all's church already, and I had no clue. Your pioneering experience in San Antonio, did it differ from all your other experiences?
Well, it's different in the sense that you're in a different building, in a different city. You're getting used to a different cultures, you know.
Yeah.
And other than that, but you know, witnessing and just doing the will of God, finding what works.
Yeah.
You know, if concerts worked, we did that. If movies worked, so back in the day, movies worked really well.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of movies. I always drew out a lot of people. Yeah. And then, of course, we do a lot of neighborhood outreaches. And when we finally were able to get a band together, we started doing outdoor concerts.
Yeah. Well, I think you're jumping a little bit ahead, Pastor, but look, let me backtrack a little bit. So I remember you mentioned this years ago, and I actually shared that in one of my sermons a few weeks ago. You said that one of the things that you and your wife noticed when y'all came into the city is that the city was consumed by jealousy and envy.
You know, I believe in different areas that you go to, there's a predominant spirit. You know, all the sins are there.
Correct.
But man, we felt a very heavy, at least in where we were at, a heavy jealousy, envy. Always people are looking at, why are they getting that, or why? It's a real pretty heavy.
And before you actually you found your building, you actually did a Bible study, right?
Yeah, where we lived, we just started going to our neighbors. We on one side we had a young teenager get saved. On the next side of us, we had a whole family that got saved. And then I was going to do a Bible study on a Friday night, went down my neighborhood, inviting everyone out. Had about 15 people come to the Bible study.
Wow.
And so, 12 of those people ended up staying with us, going to the church,
transitioning into the church. And we were actually talking about that the other day, and I was telling you how you don't see that, but you were like no, like I had people in my Bible study, and they transitioned into the church.
Yes.
And so, what was the transition like? Was it smooth? Did you start seeing more people come in as you were doing that?
Well, they were pretty excited because they helped us when we found the building. They helped us to clean, they helped us to paint, they helped us to do things that need. So they are right away felt a link with the church.
And my wife has a picture of y'all when y'all were doing that, and those few people, and y'all are doing like a car wash or something.
Yeah.
And it's just you and Miss Rodriguez, and they're little, and it's got these few people there. And my wife, she always brings it out, and she'll be like, "Oh, that's when we were pioneering, and we had done I guess you had done a car wash for something. I don't know what it was, but and so." These people linked up with y'all, and then how did you approach the pioneering perspective of this city now?
In the sense of you can't think of the whole city because you'll get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You concentrate where you're at, and then you begin to move outwardly, and you begin to outreach different areas. When we outreach an area and have good response, then we would concentrate on that area for a little while, and then we move on. We want to burn them out either.
Yeah.
But in that sense, and we would begin to develop strategies. And as the church got a little bigger and the church got older, and then we began to get musicians, we began to do this stuff. Then that would begin to open new ministries.
Yeah.
That people can get involved.
And so you started seeing, obviously, I remember when I got saved in 1998, I remember, obviously, there was a lot of people in the church when I got saved. I don't know the exact number, but I remember coming in the church, and you had a full song service, and guitar players and bass players and all kinds of different stuff going on. So you saw success. I mean, you're pioneering and you're seeing God move. I mean, because I remember there was a bunch of married couples in there, so you saw success here yet again. What was that process like as you're starting to see God bring people in and God's just moving and you're just building it?
Well,
God's building, but you're laboring.
I always made a little bit of a joke that I tell people that I've pioneered in San Antonio 3 times.
Yeah.
And because we got a crowd of people, almost 40 people, and had to deal with some fornication issues, and so they pulled all their families out. So we dropped down to about 16 people.
So yeah.
And then, of course, we built the church again. Got a lot of military people in the church, and man, we're running about 50 people, and then they all get shipped out.
Yeah.
and then we saw some people that began to tie in and really begin to be disciples.
Well, I remember, and this is where this is what Daniel wants to know, but this is where I come in the picture. I remember being a new convert, getting saved. Everybody knows my story. I met my wife at work, and I come into the church, and I remember there's all these people there, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And then I remember of like a few months maybe into my salvation, all those people were gone. Is that part of what you're saying, that you?
Yes.
And then stuff happened and people. So I remember being a young convert, brand new convert, maybe a few months. I remember I got saved in July of 1998. And then I remember as soon as I got saved, we went to Harvesters in Santa Fe.
Yeah.
But I remember in the midst of those few months that I was a new convert, I remember coming into church one day, and there was everybody was gone, with the exception of a few people, and I remember being kind of like, whoa. And in my being naive, because I was a new convert, I was kind of like, I didn't really think much of it, but I was like, I remember I asked someone, or it was either I asked Naomi or I asked someone, I was like, wasn't there more people here? And they were kind of like, because I'm not privy to a lot of stuff. I'm a new convert. They're like, oh yeah, well, people come and go, whatever, this and that. And so me looking back, and I mentioned this a while back, in the place from when I got saved back in 1998, the only people that are left in the church from when I got saved is Rudy, Lydia, and Roger. That's it. Prior to that, no one that was there is there no more.
Well, there were still some folks. There were folks there. They didn't leave till later on.
Later, yeah.
But in the sense of in that time, we just had some couples that they wanted to do their own thing, and that's why they left.
Yeah.
And so, but you know what? You can't focus.
Yeah.
On people that leave, you focus on people that stay.
Absolutely.
And you continue to go and get people saved and stuff.
Yeah.
And
God has done a great thing.
And God did a great thing from that. And from that, man, we saw a bunch of young people come in. And, and then it was right after that, we started to plant churches.
Absolutely. And so, Daniel, what did you want to know about this, bro, at this part about when I came into church? Pastor wanted to kick me out.
Well, when the first service you came to, I remember my daughter telling me that she met a guy at work, and you asked.
This is difficult to hear, Pastor.
You asked for her digits, and my daughter says, "Hey, if you want to see me, talk to me, or whatever, you need to come to church." And so
embarrassed.
And she had said that you had said yes.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that the evening that I preached, that Wednesday night that I preached, I happened to preach a sermon that I believe that the title of it was called Real Christians.
Yeah, it was called True Christian.
True Christians.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was just a basic sermon on what it was to be a Christian.
Yeah.
And I remember that night that you really got saved.
Yeah.
And of course,
you prayed with me, remember?
Yes. But I remember looking at you and saying, okay,
good.
if you're after the wrong thing, we're gonna have some issues. But when I prayed with you and got to know you in the next couple of weeks, I realized you really had a conversion experience, but my eye was still on you. And so because, you like my daughter and
He's like, look, you put it on the table. You like my daughter.
and so from that point on, I always stressed to you all the young people, but it was directed at you and my daughter, to do it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
To keep it right.
Absolutely.
And because
I agree.
if it's going to work, if it's going to be good, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And of course that led to the point when you guys did start to get serious about the relationship, and you came to talk to me and about you wanted to begin to court my daughter.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at you, and remember telling you, it says yes, that'd be fine. But then I'm trying to remember exactly the words that I had said, but I had basically told you, I said, if you hurt my daughter or if you do anything to violate my daughter, I said, then you're gonna have to.
No, I remember exactly what you said, but that's a different situation, Pastor. So,
and so in that sense, when I told you that, you started smirking, and then you saw a side of me that not too many people have seen.
Well, no, so it's two stories real quick. So just to bring clarity. So it was one time when I came into your office and I was like, hey, I want to date your daughter. I was like, hey, I want to date your daughter. You were like doing something in your sermon and you looked up, you were like, no.
Yes.
You said no. And I was like, what? And then I was like, but I want to date your daughter. And you were like, look, bro, if you're here for my daughter, bro, just leave. Like, there's no point in you being here if your focus is my daughter. Yeah. But the one situation you're talking about, the other one is...
This was at the house.
We were going to go on a date or something, and then Naomi and Mr. Rodriguez are all excited, and they're trying to get ready, and I'm sitting there, and then you just come out, and you're like, hey,
yep.
Hey, you're like, hey, man, if you do anything to violate my daughter or hurt my daughter, you're like, I'm going to come after you. And I was like, are you threatening me? And you were like, take her however you want. And then you just walked off, and I'm just sitting there like that. And then Naomi comes out, and we go on a date. And then I'm like, your dad just threatened me. She was like, what? But let me just say this on record. I appreciate you, being there and helping us through that and stuff, because we did it right, and we're blessed today. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Did you get your answers, Daniel? Just do it. So, okay, Pastor. So, I remember being in the church, and I remember this stuff happening, people leaving, and then I remember in my experience, I was like, someone told me, like, dude, don't worry about the people that left. Maybe it was you, and it was like, focus on reaching somebody else, reach some other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember someone telling me, and it might have been you, was like, maybe you're here because God wants to use you to reach people. And I remember that was the first time as a new convert, because it was only been a few months, that I was like, whoa, like I can be used, like God can do something with my life. And I didn't know. And the reason why I was asking you all these questions about the inception of your discipleship was because I had no religious background, and I didn't comprehend it. So I remember when you preached that first sermon when we were there, my first time being there in the church, and you pulled the altar call. I had no idea of the concepts of Christian words. And so I remember you pulled the altar call, and I went up to the altar to pray because I knew I needed it, but I didn't know what prayer was. I didn't know what it necessitated. And I remember someone comes up to me and says, hey, do you want to receive Jesus Christ into your heart? And I'm like, what? And I didn't really understand that. Yeah. And they're kind of trying to tell me what's up. And I'm like, look, bro, I'm just trying to pray. And so they leave me alone. And I go back to my chair, and then that's when after service, Naomi introduces me to you, and you just did a witness, and you're like, and I'm like, okay, and then you're like, do you want to receive Jesus Christ? And I was like, yeah, and you're like, well, let's pray, and I was like, I don't know how to pray, and you were like, well, you don't, just repeat after me, you said, and I'll guide you through it, and so I prayed with you and stuff, and then that's where I got saved, and then from there, here it is. Now I'm realizing that I can be used of God, and then God begins to move. We start seeing people get saved. That's where a lot of kids got saved in the church, a bunch of young kids, and then of course they ended up being raised up and stuff. And so, what was your thought process or your pastoral process or the work leading up to launching your first church?
Well, the thing is, this is what our part of the fellowship that we are of is to raise disciples, to plant churches and world evangelism. And so, and this has always been the vision of raising up men, couples that we can send into the harvest field. And so that has to be your focus, because you can just focus on just having church, and you can build a nice little church, but you'll never make a large impact until you start to pioneer and plant pioneer churches.
Sure.
And so you have to have that focus.
So you're saying that in the process of you, so when you pioneered the first church, that was Española, right? And was your focus there too, trying to raise up disciples and plant churches?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then when you went to Las Cruces, same thing. That was the attempt. That was the focus. Yes. And so for whatever reasons, that wasn't realized in those capacities, right? In those churches. But here you are now in San Antonio, and is that also the same focus? It's like, man, I gotta get this done. Like, I have to plant a church. I have to raise disciples. I have to plant a church. Or was it more, if God lets it happen, it'll happen? Or was it like, no, we have to make disciples. We have to plant churches?
No, you have to focus on that.
Okay.
And again, you have to be careful, because sometimes you can push too hard, because different people grow at different rates.
Sure.
So you have to make it available, and you allow them to minister at their capacity, at what they can do,
Or have develop their own convictions, like even like yourself.
Yeah.
Where it's like God moves you forward in that.
No, absolutely, because there are some men that catch it pretty quick, and man, and at 3 years they could be ready to go out. Yeah. There's others, it may take 6 years, it may take 10 years, and then they finally, the light will come on, and like, oh, I understand, and then they're open to being sent out.
So what transpired where you were like, I'm gonna pull the trigger on a church plant?
Well, when I finally had a couple that had a desire, and I they wanted to be sent out at the time. I believe our church was about 55, 60 people. And I knew realistically, financially, we needed to have about 80 people in the church. So I told this couple, I said, if you want me to send you out, you need to help me build this church. Help me build it till we're about 80 people. Yeah. And then I'll send you out. And you know what? This couple, they jumped in there. They started working with people, talking with people, helping to tie people in, witnessing, and just really helped me build the church. And then the opportunity came. The city opened up, and then that's when we planted our first church into New Braunfels.
And so, what was that experience like? I mean, was it what were your feelings in your experience? As you're actually seeing yourself going to do this,
in a sense of planning churches,
like it's finally gonna you're finally gonna do it. Was it like what were you feeling? What were you thinking? What were your what was it all like? It's gonna happen, XYZ. Was there certain certainties? Was there certain things you were dealing with? I mean, we always say we launch out our best. Did all these things tie into that? Was it like, no, I got to do this regardless?
No. You feel the urgency that this is something we need to do, because we're here to help people find and reach the destiny that God has for them, not for us to tell them what to do and where to go. Yeah. And so, and as you facilitate that ministry for people, then they'll step into it. Yeah. And if they step into it, then you're able to work with them even more intently and more closely, and begin to, and you encourage them to ask questions. Yeah. And of course, when they get sent out, you tell them that you do what we do. Yeah. You Absolutely. Do what we do. You don't go out there to do whatever you want to do. Yeah. You do what we do.
And so here you are now, you launched the first church. Now you're 6 churches in, right?
Yes.
And after you planted that first church, what was the feeling behind that? Was it from my perspective, and me, TJ, and Desiree always laugh about this, because when we launched them years ago, like, I was so nervous at conference, and we always laugh because when we're sitting there at the conference when they're about to announce TJ and Desiree, I'm nervous, and Desiree's asking me something, and I'm just looking at her. I ain't looking at her because I was just all nervous. Like, it was just a nerve-wracking thing for me, and for them too. But when you planted that church, what was the feeling now? It was like, I've done it. We can do this. Let's do it more. Like, what was your thought process?
No, I was excited because I knew it was just the first one.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, we can do this.
Yeah.
Because for so many years, you're like, we're going to plant churches. We're going to plant churches. We're going to plant churches. And then here you are finally doing it.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, you know what? We can.
And I was there for the whole process of this. And I remember, too, very clearly, and I'm saying the whole process because I remember when I came into the church, you were still a working pastor. And then I remember being in the church and you pulling the pledge to say, I want to go full-time, XYZ. And I remember, being like, oh, wow, like, cool, because we want to eventually launch churches, whatever. And so I was there for, I thank God I was there for the entire process of this stuff, to see the church where it was when I first came in, experience whatever has transpired in the church, then you being a working pastor, making a decision, say, you know what, no, I need to go full time, and then working it to where it's like, okay, now I've been full time, God solidified some things, now I'm going to launch a church. And now we got to launch more churches. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's pretty powerful. And so then from there was like, well, let's just launch another one, right?
Yeah.
It was just, let's work to launch more.
Yeah. And as opportunities avail themselves, as things happen, and then you begin to and once you begin to plant churches, then I think God begins to put in your heart about, okay, now we're just not going to put them domestically. Mm-hmm. We want to put them internationally.
Absolutely.
And then you begin to pray, you begin to preach that, you begin to instill that in their hearts. So it begins to light something in their heart.
Yes, yes.
And so and eventually, that's going to be the next step.
Yeah, it'll be a realization. I remember when before we got planted in Universal City, I remember me and you driving in your white Ranger over a 1604. I don't know what we were doing together. We were doing something together, and we're driving on 1604. And I remember I was like, "Hey, Pastor, have you ever considered launching a church into Universal City?" And you were like, "I've been praying for I don't know how many months for someone to ask that." You said, and then you were like, "Do you want to go in there?" And I was like, "Heck yeah!" Because I was always like, "I want to go, I want to do so," you know what I mean? Yeah. And I was like, "Heck yeah, I'll go in there," like blah blah. And then I got launched and stuff. But so here you are now, six churches in, the capacity of ministry that you have now. Where are you at now? You mentioned overseas or international. Which I'm sure God will do. I'm sure that's going to come. What's your focus? What's your perspective? What's your idea? We have harvesters coming up. Just in general, as a pastor, as a leader, as an overseer of churches, what's your thoughts looking towards the future?
Well, when it comes down to it, it's pretty much the same focus. Mm-hmm. It's always going to be raising up men, raising disciples, planting churches and world evangelism, and try to give your people as much experience in that as you can.
Yeah.
And then of course, in all that time, what encourages me is to be able to see my kids that are also involved in ministry.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you and my daughter are pastors here in Universal City. Then my other daughter and her husband are in Santa Fe.
Yes.
Are a big part of the church there in Santa Fe. Yeah. I know that one day it looks like they'll be pastoring as well.
And that is the same church that you were in.
Their desire, yes.
Yes.
And then It goes even further than that, because the Word of God talks about not just your kids, but even your kids' kids.
Correct.
That will bless your life, that you'll even see your kids' kids. And seeing Nico involved in song service, seeing just the questions that when I'm with Liam and Danica, we talk about all the different kinds of stuff. But then Liam asking me questions about God, asking me questions, and so this is on their minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it gets me really excited.
Yeah. And speaking about Nico being in ministry, he just got set down. I just joking. No, he didn't. I'm just joking. No. And you know what's so crazy, Pastor, is that Nico wants to pioneer one day, and so it would be crazy to see one day. I mean, that'd be powerful. God willing, God tarry, one day Nico's married, getting announced, getting launched out somewhere, and I think it's also awesome, talking about Vincent and Danielle, is that there they are being servants and laboring and helping in the church that you were part of,
Yes.
how it all, how they ended up there and stuff, and now still believing God, laboring in that same church, and the legacy of your ministry through, from the inception of it, and to still be a part of that and be there, with the people from the church, you know what I mean? So, and I'm sure going international is something you're believing God for and praying for, and I'm sure God will do it. Through everything you've been through in ministry, and you've been through a lot, I've been there through all of it, a large part of it, you've been through stuff before I got saved in 1998, but since 1988, I've been through everything you've been through. I've been there with it. I've seen it. I've known it. Were you ever at a point in your ministry, through whatever capacity of issues, circumstances, problems, church issues, where you ever felt, I can't do this no more, I don't want to do this no more, or not? And if you did go through that, how did you get yourself through that? How did God help you through that?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I felt that, probably about every other month. No, I'm kidding. And
you're like, I'm feeling that right now.
The thing is, I had to learn not to carry the people's problems on my shoulders.
Okay.
Because it's not mine to carry. I'm there to care for them. I'm there to help them. I'm there to do everything that I can, but I can't carry them into the kingdom of God. And so for that, and so that point, that helped me to be able to shift the weight unto God, because He can carry it. But there were times when I remember calling my pastor and just saying, you know what, you can send somebody else in here. I can't push this through. I can't, and I remember my pastor just laughing, and not laughing at me.
Yeah.
He just, Ben, hey, we all feel like that. You know what? We just press it through.
Yeah.
And then you're going to come out the other side and you're going to say, oh, wow, I'm glad I didn't quit.
Yeah.
And so, because the devil's biggest temptation is to try to get us to quit.
Yes, absolutely.
Is to try to get us to quit.
Well,
but
go ahead.
But you learn that you can't. I'm not there to solve people's problems. I'm there to preach the gospel, and they have the responsibility to take the principles and the truths that we preach and to apply them to their lives. And because I can't do it for them. Sure. And because they won't learn.
Yeah. And so, and I'm going to rephrase the question, and you don't have to answer it, if you don't want to, but you're saying, I don't carry people's problems, and you shift that towards God. But what about the issues that were created for you by people? Like, not people's problems, not dealing with people and issues. What about the issues that people created for you? Like that they, the struggles of ministry that all pastors go through, the slander, the backbiting, the rebellion, the evil speaking, the stuff that you've been through in ministry, and the emotions and the struggles that it produces in your heart and your mind as you contend. How did you combat that, and how did you overcome that? And how did you feel about that, and how did you get through it?
Well, the way I got through it, one of the things that I did is, first of all, I looked at the source of where the accusations come from. And that automatically would just say, okay, well, look at the source. Other times I look at that and I say, you know what? I know it's not true. And if it's not true, I'm not going to worry about it because right will come out right. God will fight for you.
And I remember you making that statement throughout the years, over the pulpit and dealing with me and issues, just in general, where it's like you would always say, right will always come out right, Luis. Like right will always come out right. And I think it's very true. This realization of right will come out right. I'm not going to burden myself. I'm going to shift that to God. Is that something that you've understood this and processed these things this way from the beginning, or is this something that you learned throughout the years?
Well, I think part of it is my temperament. My temperament tends to be a little more. I have patience.
Okay.
And so in that patience, I'm able to begin to process things through. And then I begin to realize, well, it's not true, so it's not worth losing sleep over.
Yeah.
And so I have to learn to put everything in perspective, because I had to learn not to take everything personal.
Okay.
And that's what really helped me, because when I take it personal, then it bothers me.
And were there times in the inception of your ministry or your Christian life where things were taken personal and you were like, I can't do this? Like, or was it like you've always had this attitude of chill, kind of like laid back, in a sense of responses and emotions, like, it doesn't really matter?
Well, I always learn not to do the knee-jerk reaction.
Okay.
Because then you'll say things or you'll do things that you'll regret later.
Yeah, yeah.
I rather take the position of caution, and then once I've processed it through, then I know what actions to take.
Yeah, and I think that's very true about your character is and conversation throughout the years. I've always told people, you have to understand, my pastor is a very cautious man. He functions through caution, and I think that's very true about your character. And I think that's, I think that character and that perspective is what has allowed for God to move in the capacity He has in your ministry and everything God has accomplished through your life and stuff. And I think there's a lot more that God's going to do and stuff.
Oh, I don't think we've scratched the surface of what God's going to do.
I agree 100%. Is there anything else, Daniel? Nico, what are you going to ask?
Oh, do you have any advice for like upcoming, like young people who want to be pastors long term? If you know what I mean. Do you have any advice for them for all the situations they may go through, the trials?
What you have to do is you have to look at the problems you go through or the situations you face as an opportunity to learn. This is going to help me. And someday as I'm a pastor, I'm going to be in this situation. How I deal with it, will either say, okay, the way I dealt with it, it didn't turn out good, so I know not to do that. But what I say is just keep your focus on God. As you keep your focus on Him, He'll guide your steps in what you need to do. Don't be so, I already know what city I have to go to. I already have to. And you know what? Those are things that they work out on their own.
Okay.
You focus on that relationship with God, because when you have that relationship with God, you'll be sensitive to His voice, and He'll guide you in the direction that you need to go.
And exercise caution like your grandpa does.
Yeah.
And so and don't let other people push you into doing things that you don't feel comfortable doing. Okay, I'm not talking about sin or nothing, but sometimes I had someone come to me and they were pressuring me big time that I needed to go overseas and pastor.
Right.
And like they knew the will of God for my life, and I know what the will of God is for my life. Mm-hmm. And so just be careful that you don't have people pressuring you, trying to make you do something that that's not what God's doing in your life at that point.
And then one more question. So say like what you were just saying, but say you do make a mistake, because everyone's not perfect. Do you take that mistake as a opportunity to learn more, or do you just take it as like, oh no, I shouldn't?
No,
I mess around with that?
Absolutely, it's a stepping stone. Mm-hmm. Everything we learn we learn for the future, because we're going to face that situation. We're going to face this, and it helps us to deal with that. But it also builds something inside of us, and it teaches us, okay, this is something I can't do or I don't need to do. Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Good stuff. Well, is there anything else, Daniel? You think we're good? Well, I think that wraps it up. That was. I'm sure there's a lot of different directions we can take. I mean, I'm talking about how many years you've been pastoring, Pastor.
Let's see. I started pastoring in 1982, and except for those couple of years I was back in Santa Fe, almost 40 years.
Wow. And you've been saved how long?
I've been saved almost 45 years. This coming October, this coming October, I got saved October of 1980. So yeah, we're looking at 43. Is that 43 years?
I'm bad at math. Is it? Okay.
No,
yes.
1978. No, it's 45 years.
Oh, okay. Wow.
45 years.
So, and I guess we can wrap it up with this. Longevity, Pastor. What would be your advice to someone, whether it's a disciple, a young Christian, a pastor, a pioneer pastor, whatever? What would be if there was a proverbial key, what would be something that you would say that would secure longevity? Like yours.
Always keep your heart right.
Okay.
In every situation, whatever it is, just keep your heart right with God. And you keep your heart right, God will give you direction and guidance in the way you need to go.
And I think that applies to, that's perfect, because that applies to every aspect of our Christian life, whether you're a Christian, a person in the church, whether you're a disciple, whether you're a pastor. If you can keep your heart right, then God will help you through whatever. And no matter what happens, and I mean, I'm sure you can say stories of things you've been through, and it all comes back down to ultimately is, well, no, I had to keep my heart right.
Yep.
So anyway, Pastor, that was a powerful podcast, great stuff. And so we're going to wrap it up right here. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And if we can think of other themes that we can bring you on for, we'll ask you, and you can let us know if you want to be a part of it and stuff, because I'm sure you have a lot of stuff that you can share. But anyway, we're gonna check out right here, guys. Thank you for watching. I am your host, Luis Perez, aka Huicho Breach, and this is
Nico, aka Little Big Red,
aka Little Gecko. Amen.
Not Little Gecko no more.
This is Life Speaks, and we're checking out. All right, peace.
And as they're arguing, I remember seeing my dad throw my mom down the stairs. And I remember my mom flying down the stairs. I mean, everything turns into like a slow motion kind of thing. And as she's going down the stairs, her arm went into the rail. And as her arm went into the rail, I started to see her arm break into little pieces, And as she hits the bottom, so there's two sets of stairs and a little foyer on the bottom. She hits the bottom, and I remember looking at her, and what it reminded me of was like one of those Raggedy Ann dolls. Yeah. She was all broken up, and I'm thinking he killed her, and so. But my mom was, she was just as bad as my dad, I remember another time when my mom, my dad were arguing, and we were upstairs also. There's a bathroom there. My dad and my mom go into the bathroom, and I could hear them arguing. And my mom pulls out a gun to shoot my dad inside the bathroom. And my dad grabs the gun with his hand, so she shoots him in the hand, And so they were just as violent. It didn't matter, you know what I mean? It was just you were lucky if nothing happened. So if there was, drinking every day. My mom drank every day.
Pastor, so you had mentioned, I want you to talk about that incident, but I was trying to find a space to come in here. You had mentioned that when you were a little kid and you were in the gang, you were so crazy out there that they greenlit you. Yep. Can you talk about that before you talk about the incident?
Okay, well, it happened in two different situations. See, when I was 12 years old, we had the guys a bunch of us had gotten together. And we had, started a little clique. I can't even remember the name of it. They had come to the house to kill me, the guys from Harbor City, from my neighborhood that I lived in, because of that. There was a guy named Casper that every time he'd see me, he would tell me that he was going to kill me, And so at that moment in my life, you know, I shared with you that my dad was in prison. My dad had gotten out of prison. And when my dad got out of prison, he came home, he had some money, he bought me some shoes, bought some stuff for me and my brother, my sister. My dad took off. Him and my mom were no longer together. And he took off to Douglas, Arizona. And, you know, I was being threatened so many times. I was being jumped. I had been beaten up by these gang members in Harbor City. So many things had happened that at that point in my life, one day we got this guy drunk. Now, I'm already living with a woman, okay? So she's, you know, I'm gonna be 13. She's already 17. She's almost an adult. She's also a gang member from Barrio Avenues, which is a different gang. And he was actually setting it on the table. He was getting ready to set it on the table, and as he was setting it on the table, my homeboy had a sarape over him, and he threw the sarape up in the air. And when he threw it up, he pulled up a sawed-off. And it wasn't, your typical sawed-off shotgun. It was a sawed-off 22. That's what it was. And when he pulled, what happened was he beat him to the punch. He pulled the trigger, but the bullet got jammed. So when he threw the sarape and picked it up, my stepfather just automatically grabbed the gun and started to unload. So I'm standing behind him as he's shooting at him. And so my homeboy has pants on, huaraches, no shirt on, and I could actually see the bullets going in and out of his body. You know, I remember walking in there, and they had her laying on this metal table. They had shot half of her face off. And I remember looking at her from a distance. My dad had gone with me, and he started to yell at me and tell me to go see your mother. And he started to push me. And as he started to push me that way, I remember I said to him, and so I just became very bitter, more than what I already was, hateful. I became more violent to the point that I didn't care if I died. I didn't care if I killed someone. It didn't matter to me anymore. Right after that, I had gotten into a argument with my brother-in-law, and I slit his throat 8 times. And I ended up in jail, and I remember being in jail and waking up and not knowing what happened. You know, because my mind was just warped. I was just messed up. And I remember when their guns sounded empty. Click, click. I came out with a gun in each hand. And I ran up to the car and I started to shoot inside the car. And I remember because they were young kids. They were young men. They were screaming. And they're going around in circles in the middle of the street, and I'm running with the car. My brother-in-law's with me. He's also shooting at the car, and they take off. No remorse, no fear, no nothing of the consequences. It didn't mean anything. Because at this time of my life, I was already numb. I didn't feel no pain, you know. And I remember walking up to him. And I remember these were the words he said to me. He says, I'm going to tell you something. I don't know what it means. He says, but you know what it means. And God knows what it means. And so he leans over and he says something in my ear. I don't even know what he said. To this day, I don't remember. I wish I did. He said something in my ear, and when he said these words, I remember getting a flashback of all the bad things I had done. Like in a second, everything. And then I remember just standing back because it was like real quick, but everything was clear. And I remember looking at him, and then in my mind I thought, and if you do, I will serve you for the rest of my life. And when I said those words, I remember something hitting me in the back of my knees, and I fell on the ground, and I started to worship God. At that moment, I remember everybody. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many people. I looked like I had the football. You know what I mean? Everybody's piled up praying for me, and I wept, until all that pain was gone, until all that from when I was a little boy, 7 years old, was gone.